Thank you very much, and thank you for the wonderful turnout. This is really exciting. I'm just going to preface before I start talking, this laptop has a quirk. I'm going to be switching back and forth between PowerPoint and a couple of different other programs. And it has a quirk where when it does that, it sometimes decides to project an entirely different screen than what I think it's projecting. So if there's a blue screen up there with some Sumerians tapping on old Macintosh computers, just holler at me and I will try and fix it. Today I want to talk about the Antikythera mechanism. And for those of you who are familiar with it, you will know that it's the most complex piece of ancient technology that we have. And saying that for me is, it's not a personal story in a really direct way, but I did some work on this thing back when I was writing my dissertation, which I finished in 2000. And at that time, we didn't know what we now know about it. And so everything I said about this thing in my dissertation turns out to have been wrong. And that's a wonderful position to be in, because what we've learned about it is absolutely flooring. For somebody who works in the history of science, the history of astronomy, and the history of technology, you know, we had this thing, we just couldn't see inside of it properly, and so we didn't know what it did, and we were skeptical about what it did, and I'll try and give you a sense today of why we might have been skeptical. And the answer is that there's nothing this complex that exists on the face of the Earth until about the 13th century CE. So it's 1,300 years ahead of its time, and I'll try and show you why. But the story of the Antikythera mechanism is not just a story of an ancient piece of technology, it's also a story of remarkable use of technology today in order to try and unlock its secrets. And so it's kind of a marvelous technological story at both ends of its history. And that's the story I want to tell you today. This is the state it's in. You have a picture here which happens to correspond. I have a clicker that works, I'm told. Happens to correspond with my own photo that I brought in of the mechanism. This is the main gear wheel, the main wheel that drives the thing. This would have been turned by a crank on the side that cranked it around, and all the other gears in the device are driven off of this. And this is the largest fragment that we still have, and it's on display now in the Archaeological Museum at Athens. The machine itself, what we have of it is approximately 40 or 50 gears in various states of decomposition. And because of recent work that's been done since 2005, we've been able to figure out where each of the gears goes in relation to each of the other gears. This is sort of a cross-section of the device, and also how many teeth each of the gears has. It's very hard to read because our projector is a little bit out of focus. It's tiny anyway, you probably wouldn't be able to read it, but I'll just point that out. I want to show you, just before we get into the mechanism itself, oh, and before I get there, so we have dials on the back of it that show calendrical information and eclipse information, and then a few other things. I did it backwards there, calendrical and eclipse. And then there's something going on the front of the machine, which would have been its main display, and because we're able to now read some of the writing that was on the front and back doors of the device, we know that there must have been planetary displays up here, some kinds of pointers showing you planetary positions in the zodiac. Those are not preserved, those are lost. But we can reconstruct them with some plausibility, and I'll show you what one of those reconstructions looks like. So I have here a video that was done. Thank you, that's the one. That's the one, and it's going to do it every single time. I can't seem to tame it. All right, so here we go. We're good now. Antikythera mechanism. This is there's a guy called Michael Wright who is one of the foundational people in the research of the Antikythera mechanism, and he came into the Antikythera mechanism kind of by a sideline. His day job was that he was repairing medieval instruments and clocks in the Science Museum in London, and he became interested in the Antikythera mechanism, and because Michael's a kind of hands-on sort of guy, what he did was he hand-built a reproduction of the mechanism. And it's approximately the size of a big dictionary, good-sized dictionary, in bronze. And if you ever see a talk being given by Michael Wright, go to it, corner him afterwards, he will let you play with it, and it's really worth doing. In fact, what he will do is disassemble it in front of you so you can see everything that's inside. But in the absence of having him here, I have this handy computer-animated video of how the thing worked. Oh, and we've got I already watched the commercial. I pre-watched the commercial for you, so this wouldn't happen. And yet, Google knows. All right. The best thing was that was an ad for a product I already own. It's just the way the world works. Okay, so that's the main gear wheel. That's the fragment that we just saw. I'm going to pause it a couple of times as we go through. And that turns around in the equivalent for the device of 1 year of time reckoning. There's the drive wheel that makes it go. Coming in underneath, that might be better if I have a pointer. These are, apparently if you try and laze, it reduces your, all right, I'm going to try and laze again. Let's see what happens. Yeah, it doesn't like that. All right, so I'm not going to laze. This is a laser-free zone. Speaking of modern technology and the wonders of it. Laser-free zone. So these are the gears that drive the calendar wheel that goes out to a 235-month lunar calendar cycle, 19-year calendar cycle, on the what we call the back face. We don't know which face was really the front and the back, but we call the sexy face the front face. And so here's all the gear trains that come off of that main drive wheel. You can see there are quite a number of them. There's some gears here that are driving the speed of the moon, and then coming down here we have, I've done it backwards. That's the eclipse gear train. This is the calendar gear train. I can't keep it straight which way anything is oriented. And now we're going to flip up into the back dial, and this is, we have bits of this display. We know pretty much this is what this display looked like. And so we have two different pointers being moved in opposite directions, and the kind of clever bit of this display that's a little bit unusual, and it took Michael Wright several years of working on the device to realize, because we don't have the whole circle. It turns out this is not a circular display, it's a spiral. So the pointer comes in here. Somewhere in here there's a little pin that goes into the groove, so you can slide that cylinder down and drop the pin into here, and so then it's pointing at these months, their month names in these cells. And as it goes around in that spiral, it'll come back around, it'll be in the next groove out pointing at a different set of month names. Next one, different set of month names. Next time around, different set of month names. And the same thing happens here with an 18-year eclipse cycle. Kind of like an old-fashioned record player. The only difference is on an old-fashioned record player, the needle's coming in from the outside rather than the middle, but it's exactly the same principle. It's running out through a groove, yeah, showing you information. And so this works on a 19-year calendar cycle. It's directly related to the 19-year calendar cycle that we still use in the modern Gregorian calendar for determining the date of Easter. It's a direct descendant of this calendar. And then over here we have an 18-year eclipse cycle that shows you when it is possible for you to have lunar eclipses and when it's possible for you to have solar eclipses. The lunar eclipses pretty much always happen. The solar eclipses happen somewhere on the planet, but you don't know if you're going to be able to see them. That's why we call them possible eclipses. All right, so that's the back dial, and now we're going to go around to the front. Before we do that, I forgot, I want to gesture to this thing. I won't laze at it, but there are three different hands on this clock face, right? And I want you to think about how those are being moved. Up the middle is a pin that goes into the red second hand, and it clicks around 60 times in a minute, right? Around that is a sheath, like a straw, and the minute hand slots onto that, and that straw can turn independently of the pin that's driving the second hand. It's around the outside. And around that is a third straw that drives the hour hand at a different rate of speed. Can you see how that works? Okay, we're going to do 7 or 8 of those overlapped on top of each other here in bronze, handmade in the 1st century BC. So here comes our planetary displays. This bit, everything except the moon on here is a reconstruction. It's been destroyed. The lunar pointer we still have, and it's kind of cool too, but we'll get to it. And so what you'll see is, so here comes Mercury, the Sun, Venus, and can you see how we have a pin coming up the middle, and then a larger shaft that's kind of like a straw, and then a larger shaft around that that's like a straw for a pointer, larger shaft around that, larger shaft around that. So we're going to end up with 7 different pointers all moving independently of each other on the face of the device. Can you picture that? Here we go. And Michael, taking his cue from Renaissance and medieval clocks, has made each of the drivers of those things a slightly different shape. Some are pentagons, some are squares. You'll just see them as they come out here. So these are the different drivers that come through. And so each of these drives a pointer, and you'll see the complexity of the motion in a minute. On a modern clock, things just have to move clockwise at a constant rate of speed. I'm doing it backwards here because I'm thinking backwards. On a planetarium, or an astronomical computer, which is what the Antikythera mechanism is, you need the planets to model their actual motions in the heavens, which are significantly more complex than that. The easiest one to watch is down here, Venus, as it comes through. It's the one that looks like the symbol for female, a circle with a cross underneath it. We don't have any, there are no markers. It is a markerless zone. You know the circle with the plus under it that represents female as opposed to male? That's the symbol for Venus. So just watch that one because it's got, and there's Mercury as well moving very quickly. But it's the easiest one to spot. So here is Venus there. You will see it come to a complete stop in a moment and then reverse itself. Why is it not doing it? Something there, here. Comes to a stop and goes backwards for a bit and then goes forwards again, right? Each of the planets has those forwards and backwards motions. Each of the planets except the sun and moon has that. And so this mechanism is modeling something whose gear work is significantly more complex than what you have in a modern day clock because of the phenomena it's meant to model. Finally, this is the lunar pointer whizzing around at a high rate of speed, but Michael Wright also discovered, he published it in a horological journal, so it was kind of hard to find for a lot of people for a number of years, but it turns out to be one of the cleverer bits of the device. And it's a mechanism that's reused by Renaissance and medieval clocks in order to show the phases of the moon. So what's happening in here is poking through the front of this face is a little ball that is half painted in silver, not painted, but half silvered. And so as the pointer goes around, that half silver turns, and so it physically shows you the phases of the moon. Right now it's nearly full, just going towards new, right? The video moves too quickly to really capture that. There it is at new moon. Come on around. There's the first visibility of the lunar crescent. You see that? Isn't that cool? Yeah. And for some reason, that mechanism was actually inserted backwards. We speculate that at the shipwreck, it was actually in for repairs. So I'll just let that run out. So you can see the complexity of the motions and the sort of richness of the gear work. Now again, most of this front face, except that lunar pointer, is reconstructed, but I think it's very, very plausibly reconstructed. And this is Michael Wright's classic shape where it isn't actually a rectangle. He's got this kind of thing sticking up from a back face. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So that's what the mechanism does. Now, as to why the planets move back and forth in that kind of motion. If you're not familiar with naked eye astronomy, I just want to draw your attention to this model of the solar system and talk about what the universe looks like if you live in a geocentric universe, as the maker of this device certainly did. The people who made this thing believed that the Earth sat still at the center of the universe and all the planets moved around it. And they then had to model the motions of the planets based on that assumption. And what I mean by modeling the motions of the planets is this blue dot here is the Earth. I think I can laze now. Let's see what happens. That blue dot here is, it's amazing. It's taking that for reference. I know what I can do. No, I'm not going to mess around with it. I have a mouse. Mouse makes it easier. I'll just point. I'm going to zoom. There we go. You can imagine if you're looking at, from the Earth, you're trying to figure out what zodiacal sign the sun is in. What that means is, looking at the sun, if you could look directly at the sun, it would look like it was in a zodiacal sign out here, some constellation that you're seeing out in outer space here. Mars, from the Earth, looks like it's out in some different zodiacal constellation, right? We're now going to track the motion of those things, and I'm going to just put this model in motion. And you'll see that as the Earth goes around, that line of sight from the Earth to Mars changes in this direction predominantly, right? I'll just speed it up a little bit. Oh, everything reset itself. There. So if you think about the direction that it looks like Mars is moving in, Mars is here moving counterclockwise, because we're looking at it from a particular direction. It looks like it's here, 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 here. But as the Earth overtakes it, it's going to look like it comes to a stop, goes backwards, and then comes forwards again. Did you see that? The relative motion changes. That's its retrograde motion. And that's what any Greek or Babylonian astronomical theory is going to have to account for. And you can see that the Antikythera mechanism specifically is meant to model that motion. Seamless. We only saw the Sumerians for a moment. Seamless. All right. Now can I laze? All right, it's happy with me lazing here. That's good. That was our video break. This is the entirety of the device today. So just that phenomenon, retrograde motion, and then we'll come back to how that's modeled in the mechanism in a moment. This is the state of the device today. You can see some of the fragments are very, very small. We did not excavate those in that shape. These are not pieces that were brought up from the bottom of the Mediterranean in that state. What we brought up originally in 1902 was just one large lump of metal. And as it dried out, it cracked open, and over time, it has fallen into more and more and more pieces. Some of those are due to efforts at restoration, unfortunately. That's one of the stories of what happens with archaeological artifacts. But the most remarkable part, I think, on the side of the people who discovered the mechanism was that they didn't try and crack open that original lump. They could have, but they didn't. They waited. And I think that's a really interesting sort of thing, because they could not have known in 1902 that 100 years later, we would have sufficient technology that we could just see through bronze, right? As if looking through a window. They could not have known that, and yet they did not succumb to the temptation to try and peel it apart and have a look at it. The conservators at the museum, I think, were very sensible. Now, I mentioned this comes from a shipwreck, and the shipwreck was off the island that gives the device its name. This is the island of Antikythera. There's Crete, there's the Peloponnesos. This is the island of Kythera. Across from it, I wish I was making this up, is Antikythera. Antikythera is a small little island. It is very sparsely populated even today. There are no more than about 30 people who live on the island. And a ship sunk off the coast of it in the 60s BC. Now, it's really craggy on the one side, and it looks like a Roman cargo ship, very, very richly cargoed Roman ship, was fleeing from a storm and tried to tuck in against the cliffs on the eastern side of the island, northeastern side of the island, in order to shelter from the storm. Unfortunately, that didn't do them any good, and the ship ended up sinking just off the coast, just off the northeast coast there. This is what that coast looks like today. The cliffs are almost straight up from the sea, and underwater, the cliffs run down at a 45-degree angle. The ship itself has settled across a 300-meter range that goes really quite deep. It starts at about 45 meters deep and goes deeper from there. So the diving that it took to get this stuff up, all the treasures from Antikythera, is technical diving, and highly technical diving in 1902. The people who are doing the excavation today are wearing Navy, like deep sea exploration suits. They look like robots. It's amazing. But the original suits were exactly what you would stereotypically think of if you thought of a sponge diver wearing a suit, a breathing suit in 1902. You have the lead shoes, so you sink to the bottom. Your air is being pumped to you from the surface by guys just working big cranks. And you're in a kind of self-contained, partly leaky, but not too terrible if you're lucky, suit, and you can see a little bit through this brass helmet. And it was sponge divers sheltering from a storm in 1902 who pulled up to that same set of cliffs and decided that since they were waiting things out, maybe they would see if there were any more sponges that they could get, and they jumped into the water and went down looking for sponges and found an arm coming up from the bottom of the sea, a big bronze arm. Right? Or actually, I think that the arm was marble. I'm not positive now. So from a statue, anyway. And from the Antikythera wreck, we have some of the great treasures of ancient Greek art in bronze. We have the Antikythera philosopher. Some of you will have seen it in various collections. One of the things about large bronze anything in antiquity is that they don't tend to survive unless they've been accidentally buried or shipwrecked. Right? Bronze is useful, people reuse it, it corrodes, it starts to look awful. Let's get rid of that old thing, we can melt it down and turn it into something useful. And so if you've ever seen large bronze statues in museums, the majority of them are from shipwrecks or some kind of landslide or something like that that buried them and preserved them. Other than that, they don't tend to survive. And the same thing is true as a sort of key explanation, we think, for why there's only one Antikythera mechanism. There may have been more than one in antiquity, but this was the only one that was lucky enough, quote unquote, to have gone into a shipwreck. So this is the largest fragment as it existed when it first was pulled out or when it first broke, but then it further broke. This is what is now, we now call fragments A, B, and E, which again have corroded into all of these various bits and bobs. So we pulled this thing up, and even through here, if the thing was in focus, you'd be able to, or a better focus, you might be able to make it out. You can see here there's a toothed gear. You can actually see that on the surface. It's poking through the skin of the fragment. Up here too are parts of that spiral dial. So you can see it's something that's got gears in it. We don't have things with gears in them from antiquity. We know they knew about gears. They talk about them in a couple of places. But what could it be? Something with gears and a circular display. And so the early speculations about it were maybe it was some kind of astrolabe. Maybe it was a planetarium of some sort. 1928, we thought maybe it was some kind of astrolabe. In 1959, Albert Rehm, one of the guys that I've done a lot of work on, thought it might have been some kind of clock, mechanical clockwork. As soon as you see gears in a modern context, you might think of clockwork. It's not a clock.
It doesn't have any springs.
It doesn't have any springs, but there are other ways of making a clock work. What it doesn't have is an escapement, right? This is an escapement. This is the earliest kind of escapement that we know of. This is from late medieval clocks. This is something called a verge and foliot. And you can see here the basic idea is the reason you would have a spring in a clock is to drive this wheel here. You want to keep it turning at a constant speed. Now originally what you would do is have weights and have a heavy weight pulling on one side and a lightweight counterbalancing it, and the weights would just click it along like this over time. But the idea is to to turn that constant radial motion into some kind of regulated motion that you can control very, very carefully. And so the idea was you put these two metal plates onto the shaft of a mechanism that's being pushed by the toothed gear. So the toothed gear is actually actively moving, but it's being resisted because it's being smacked by this paddle. And then down here it catches on this paddle, then it catches on the top paddle, catches on the other paddle, catches on the top paddle, catches on the bottom paddle, and that moves these bars back and forth. And you can control the rate at which that happens by changing the weights on the ends or moving them farther out or farther in. And that's how you can regulate time, right? That's what allows the mechanical clock to work, is an escapement. Now there are different kinds of escapements. If you have a mechanical wristwatch, it'll use a different kind of escapement entirely, but it is an escapement, and the idea is to turn constant oscillation of some sort into controlled oscillation so that you can keep your clock in time. That kind of thing is not in the mechanism. We don't have an escapement, so it can't be a clock. What it is instead is a computer, and you drive it to model the heavens. But time marches on. In 1959, we thought it might be a clock. By 1974, a historian of science called Derek de Sola Price manages to convince the Archaeological Museum at Athens to let him put the mechanism into an X-ray machine. And he just bombards it with gamma rays and then takes the photographic plates that he gets out of this and tries to somehow reconstruct what he's seeing inside. So now for the first time somebody sees through the mechanism. We can see the inside of the device. And we can see that it's full of, unsurprisingly from what we knew already, full of toothed gears. But the problem is that this is all the layers of the device. As you're looking down from the top of it, all of the layers of the device are in one plane in your picture. You can't tell whether this set of teeth is above or below this set of teeth. There's no way to tell that from this kind of photograph. And you can see where there's a lot of metal, where there are a lot of layers, you simply can't see through it at all. And just so you understand what Price was up against, this is not Price's original photograph. This is Price's original photograph and a magic marker that he and his wife spent weeks doing, trying to just draw out so that they were clearer, the number of teeth on the mechanism. You see weird things happen here too, like it seems to get bent. It's really hard to tell what's going on. And so Price can't, if you don't know how many teeth there are interacting with other things that have so many teeth, you can't really do the math to compute what the astronomical theory might have been that was driving this. But Price is convinced it's astronomical. And it would turn out that he was in fact right. At this point, people start speculating that maybe this was a medieval clock or something like that, that somebody dropped on top of the wreck by accident, and it was somehow just caught up in the excavation. People really don't know what to make of this in context. I have a clicker. So this is the final drawing that Price produced, but again, he doesn't know what goes where, and he's guessing on a lot of the tooth numbers, and it turns out that the numbers of teeth that he's got in there just don't work astronomically. You can't make an astronomical computer out of what's going on in here. Okay? But fast forward 20 years, and we start getting new data. Michael Wright, who I've already mentioned with in connection with the half-silver ball, and you saw his animated video of the mechanism, Michael Wright decides that he's going to use a newer technique. It's actually not a new technique. It was used as far back as the 1930s, but it hadn't occurred to Price to use it because Price didn't know a lot about X-rays. And this is something called X-ray tomography. This is a really, really clever little trick where you can use just an old-fashioned X-ray machine to start getting something like a 3D model. And the basic idea is, this is your device here. Oh, whoa, back. This is your sample here. You want to see inside this bronze thing, whatever it is, right? So let's pretend this is the mechanism. And inside the mechanism, we might have a gear centered on the green dot, a gear centered on the, where they're going this way, a gear centered on the orange dot, a gear centered on the purple dot, and a gear centered on the red dot. What we do, just an X-ray machine, but we take the X-ray gun and have it moving over time, this way. So it's taking picture, 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 right? And we have the photographic plate moving this way over time. So the picture is being taken as the plate is physically moving. So the camera is moving and the plate is moving. And what that means is if you follow some of these lines, the picture that it takes of the green gear when the camera is way over here doesn't even hit the plate. Some of the green camera shots are going to hit the plate, like if it's here and the plate it's right there. But again, when it gets over to here, it takes a picture of the green thing and it projects it way off here. So it's a schmear, right? It makes a smear of the green gear. The orange gear, the same thing happens. It kind of smears it across. But stuff that's in the sample area gets perfectly, crisply shot, right? And we can then take different sample areas at different depths by changing the speed of the gun and the slide. Yeah.
It seems to me to be a little bit like to be method of parallax via
It's exactly that.
running around in photography.
Yeah, it's very similar. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And it is parallax that it's taking advantage of. Yeah. But that allows you to have.
Time for questions afterwards as well.
Okay.
It's okay. So what it gives you then is a really crisp picture of your target area, and then just kind of some blurry background noise for your non-target areas. And you can get a fairly fine slice this way, not infinitely fine, but Michael Wright was able to make fantastic progress shooting the mechanism this way, and he was working on it diligently from the mid-90s with a guy called Alan Bromley. Bromley unfortunately passed away in the middle of the project. But again, he wasn't publishing in really visible places, and a lot of people just didn't know he was doing this work. Unless you knew Michael personally or knew someone who did, people tended to sort of miss the fact that he was doing this work. And in 2005, not knowing that this work was ongoing, a documentary filmmaker by the name of Tony Freeth, PhD mathematician, but who was making documentary films for a living, heard about the mechanism from somebody, I forget the exact story there, and decided that he wanted to get modern medical imaging technology brought to bear on the mechanism. Right? Let's do what we can do with the human body, where we can have a CT scan taken of the human body and we can slice into it in very, very fine slices indeed. And Freeth thought, let's try and do this. And Tony Freeth is an amazing, very energetic, very dedicated investigator. And he managed to convince everybody he talked to that this was a brilliant idea. And in particular, he got a company called X-Tech, who was an imaging company, and he persuaded them that what they wanted to do was to build the world's largest X-ray tomograph, 450,000 volts of electron tomograph. The power supply on this thing is like that, right? Seriously, that's the plug. That's the cable for the plug. It's twice as large as the largest existent tomograph on the planet to that date. And X-Tech decided that they would build this and they'd make a fortune shooting aircraft turbines. But that they would do the Antikythera mechanism first because it would be really good advertising, right? And so they did. They built the world's largest X-ray tomograph and shipped it over to Athens, managed to get the permissions. Tony Freeth convinced everybody, various ministers in Greece, heads of the museum all the way down, convinced them that what they were going to do was wheel this thing in. It's the size of half this room. It's huge. Wheel this into the archaeological museum and shoot the device. And the Greeks were not really keen on letting people handle the device anymore. You can see how fragile it was getting, but he convinced them. The second new bit of technology that was brought to bear is something developed by Hewlett-Packard called polynomial texture mapping. And this is a technique that is really clever and very simple. And it's a method of using just a standard SLR camera, DSLR, off the shelf, nothing fancy, just a Nikon or a Canon that you might own. You point it down at your sample, and you take a series of 40 or 50 photographs with the light moving around on a hemisphere around the object, and then you recreate a picture of the object where instead of, for this image here that we're looking at, what the computer is doing is projecting for each pixel in it a three-dimensional number, the red, the green, and the blue quantities in that pixel, right? And if they're saturated, you get black. If they're saturated in the other direction, you get white. And if they're saturated in some other direction, you get some other color, right? What polynomial texture mapping does is just adds two numbers to each pixel. So you don't end up with huge files, but those two numbers for each pixel tell you how the pixel is oriented in three-dimensional space. And so with a standard SLR, I can now do a 3D model, and all I have to do is take 50 photographs, plug the 50 photographs into a computer, have it compile the image, and I get something that looks like this. You see why I warned you, right? All right. This is a fragment of the Antikythera mechanism. It's, maybe I will kill the lights here for this because it's front. All right. What I can do with this object now is move the light around. It's just a photograph, but it's got those two extra dimensions on each pixel. I can zoom in. So here's an inscription on the surface of the device. And if you've ever worked with an inscription, you know that your flashlight moving around is the key thing that allows you to read it. And these are a little dim, unfortunately. It's not the most fabulous reading, but you can see the epi here. Epitele, I think it is, there's a tau, epsilon, lambda. Yeah, so something is rising, right? Some star is rising, is what it's saying. But the other thing I can do is I'm not limited now by physical light. I can say, what would happen, you know when you get a new car and someone scratches it and it stands out, on that shiny surface, the scratch stands out. You know that feeling? New guitar? Anybody? You know? What if this was made of chrome? And so I can give it the properties of chrome. Aha, am I right? And now I can read this thing, right? And I can do this to stone. I can take the worst condition marble, all crumbly and gross, and I can just chromify it in here. It's called specular enhancement. And I can play with all the parameters. I can make, different, oh, that was nice. Let's do that because it brightens it up a bit. And so now you can read it, right? It just pops. So this is the other technology that helped to crack the secrets of the Antikythera mechanism. Now we can read everything on the surface significantly better than you could with the naked eye. Not only that, if I want to read it and argue with your reading of it, I don't have to go to Athens and get the thing out of its box and put it to further risk. I can simply download the file. Right? It's not a very big file. It's about 39 megs, I think, for this one. Not significantly bigger than a photograph. Okay. Where is my, okay, ready, ching, whoop, uh-oh, it's like a bad memory, deja vu. Come on. All right, polynomial texture, just as an aside, because it's so beautiful, polynomial texture mapping was not invented for us antiquities people. It was, in fact, invented to get better lighting in video games. True. This is a true story. HP wanted to try and fix one of the problems that you have in video games, which, if you have long memories like me, is that you've got these lights in your game. You want to give the player a realistic experience, right? The more realistic the experience, the more fun the game is. Maybe the better it'll sell. Maybe the richer you'll get. You've got all these lights. You can see some lights shining down here somehow. They get some subfloor stuff going on. If I'm killing monsters, I like my subfloor lighting. I've got lighting coming down from here, but none of this lighting is behaving like natural light does, right? These monsters are not actually being lit by those lights. You don't have computerized photons coming down and hitting this. Is he a cacodemon? No. What are they? Is it a cacodemon? Who knows?
Those are the imps.
Imps. Thank you. All right, so now I'm just going to take you through 3 iterations of exactly this video game. This is the video game Doom from 1993. I was just starting grad school, not saying anything. Fast forward just a few years. Oh, there we go. 1997, and we've now got significantly better lighting going on, but it is computationally expensive, right? So here's the laser beam flying out. There's something at the other end that this guy is shooting at, and the laser beam actually throws a puddle of light down on the floor, right? That's pretty clever. It looks really cool. But by the time we get up to, say, 2016, what we have going on is light sources that are actually actively lighting the game. Or, I mean, it's virtual, but you get the idea. That the light that's falling on any of these monsters is directly related to some light source that you can look up and see, right? But plotting that out, right, if you were trying to do that from first principles, just sort of physically saying, okay, there's a light up here, where would each photon be going? You can't build a computer that could deal with that. And so polynomial texture mapping was a way of kind of faking it. If we could figure out how the light would reflect off of one of these guys, if they were made out of plastic, we can just 3D print it and then see what happens. We can then start modeling it in the video game. And that's basically the idea behind it. But HP being HP, Packard's son, the Packard of Hewlett-Packard, Packard's son is in fact a classicist. And so HP has always been pretty generous to those of us who work in the ancient world. And they've made their polynomial texture mapping available. You can download it for free even now, and you can work with it. I've done this in museums in Berlin and a couple of other places. All right, where are we for time? Perfect. So the microfocus X-ray tomography slicing into the device gave us not just a picture of the gears, but we can now start also figuring out where the various fragments go relative to each other. We can start reconstructing where all those bits and pieces go. But not only that, we can take slices from the inside of the device. So pieces of bronze that were on, say, the exterior door of the device that got collapsed and folded into the device, right? So the writing is on the inside of that piece of bronze now. Using the computed tomography, we have an incredible resolution, and we can see now, in order to read what's written on the inside of this. So even in layers that are no longer visible, they're covered up with crushed bronze, we can read what's written on those dials, for example. And what emerges is a Corinthian calendar. So we have a month name here, Machaneus, Dodecateus, Lanotropios, Craneos, and a bunch of others, right? And these are month names that look like a Corinthian calendar. We also find this little interesting thing. There's a 4-year dial. There's a pointer that goes around every 4 years and tells you in the first year, that's a symbol known from astronomy and astrology for year. It looks like a Roman L. Year 1 is the Isthmian Games and the Olympian Games. Year 2 is the Nemean Games and the Na'an Games. Na'a. Year 3, again, Isthmia and the Pythian Games. And year 4, the Nemean Games again. And we've since been able to pull out just here, a guy called Paul Iverson has pulled out the word Haliea, which is a local festival in Rhodes. And this has allowed us to speculate not only on where the machine was built, there's a long tradition of astronomical research at Rhodes, but also possibly where the purchaser was, which we now think was probably in Epirus in northern Greece because of the Na'an Games from Dodona. All right, moving right along. Finally, in fragment E, we start getting some interesting things. This is one of the things that proves me dead wrong from my dissertation. We're able to read in here. It's hard to see, but I've gone over it with red marker here. Actually, I think Alex Jones went over it with red marker. Yeah, heliki tmemata. So in the spiral, divisions, tmemata, and then here's the Greek numeral for 235. And there are excluded days, 20-something. We know it has to be 22. And if you're a historian of astronomy and you see 235 as a number, you immediately get excited because that's the 19-year calendar cycle. A guy called Geminus in the introduction to the astronomy tells us the astronomers Euctemon, Philippus, and Callippus, the 1st century BC, constructed a period of 19 years, for they observed that in 19 years, 6,940 days are contained and 235 months, including the leap months. In 19 years, 7 leap months are reckoned. In the 235 months, they designated 110 hollow months, 29-day months, and 135 full months, 30-day months. In order that the treatment of the hollow months be as uniform as possible, they divided the 6,940 days by 110, by this number. figured out that there are 63 29-day months, and so therefore it's necessary to remove every 63rd day you have to remove a day. Therefore it's necessary to remove a day from the calendar every 63 days in the cycle. The 30th is not always removed, rather the one following once every 63 days is chosen for removal. So this is a problem that is unique to lunar calendars that's being solved in a particularly weird way. Lunar calendars are weird for a couple of different reasons. One is that the actual lunar month isn't an integer number of days long. It's not 29 days long, it's not 30 days long. It's 29.532 something, 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 right? So if you're just going out and observing the lunar crescent saying, it's the first day of the month, go out again in 29 days, you may see it that day, but you might not see it till the next day, right? And you're going to have you're going to have a 29-day month, a 29-day month, then maybe a 30-day month, they'll alternate 29 and 30. Sorry, I said that backwards. They'll alternate 29, 30, 29, 30. Every once in a while, you have 2 30-day months. 29, 30, 29, 30, 30, 30, 29, 30, 29, 30, and so on. And so schematically, what this 19-year cycle does is it turns out that 235 of those months fits pretty well into 19 365 and a quarter day years. And so you can specify how to lay out those 29 and 30-day months ahead of time. You don't have to wait for somebody to see the lunar crescent. And that's fine, but what this guy is saying, what Geminus is saying, is the way that they proposed to do that was to pull out every 63rd day. So today's the 8th of November. If tomorrow is the 63rd day, we're going to remove it, and so tomorrow will now be the 10th of November. We've pulled the 9th out. There's no 9th. 63 days later, it'll be I'm not going to try and do the math here, 2nd of January. Tomorrow's the 63rd day, so tomorrow's the 4th of January. We went from the 2nd to the 4th. And I said, this is absolutely impossible. No one would do this. This doesn't make any sense. Guess what does this? All right. And just for the 19-year cycle, just to show you how good it is, I've just pulled out the first new moons for a bunch of years from 1961 to 2036 here. These are the first new moons of the year, and you can see in the Gregorian calendar, using the Gregorian calendar as a tracking device, it's really pretty good. So 19 years later, it happens on about the same date, January 16th, January 17th, January 17th, January 16th. And the only reason there's any variability there is because we throw in leap years. So it'll bounce around by a day here and there. 6th, 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 5th, 25th, 25th, 24th, 24th, 14th, 14th, 13th, 13th, etc. It's a good cycle. It's a good calendar cycle. And as I said, it's still used today. It's used in the Jewish calendar, and it's used in the Gregorian calendar specifically for regulating the day of Easter. We use this 19-year cycle to do that calculation. And so within that 19-year cycle, we have a couple of other things happening. We have that back and forthing, 30, 29, 30, 29, 30, 29, 30, 30, 29, 30. We can lay those out, right? And that's how it was in 2018. Those were the lunar months for the visible moon. But we also have the fact that 12 lunar months are 353 days long. And so every now and then, actually about every other year almost, you have to throw in an extra month to try and keep the calendar in line, right? We throw in a leap day every 4 years. Every 4 years we throw in February 29th. In a lunar calendar, in this year you would throw in an extra month, then you'd have a 12-month year, 12-month year, then you throw in an extra month, 12-month year, throw in an extra month. And this has the effect of keeping the lunar calendar roughly in line with the solar year, right? If you pay attention to, for example, the date of the first day of Hanukkah in the Jewish calendar, if you watch that, it's never outside of late November to late December. It's always in that pocket somewhere, right? And it moves around from year to year, but not by a lot. It's never going to be in September, right? And that's because the Jewish calendar intercalates. It throws in these extra months here and there to keep it locked in just that way. And so this calendar proposes to do that, and here it is manifest in the Antikythera mechanism, right? And so our pointer is going around, pinned to a slot, sliding around through here. If you can make it out, you could see up here, Eucleos, the month of Eucleos is doubled. We have a second month of Eucleos there, so that's a year where we threw in an extra month. And as the pointer goes around, you have Greek numerals in here, alpha for 1, epsilon for 5, theta for 9, etc., around here, coming into 1923, and 26. That is a stigma, 26. And what that tells us is that when the pointer is it clicks into here, that says 26, and that means for this month, you remove the 26th. As the pointer comes around, when you end up at this month again, you remove the 26th. As the pointer comes around again at this month, you remove the 26th. And so in any of these months, you remove the 1st. Any of these months, you don't remove a day. 63 days later, you pull out the 5th. You don't remove a day. 63 days later, you pull out the 9th. It's really clever. It's really, it's not even mechanical. Like I'm blown away by the gears, but I'm just blown away by this bit of information display, right? This is astoundingly interesting to me. I think it's really, really neat. All right, and this particular thing I can show you, I can find the spot in the 19-year cycle where we were on January 5th of 2019. It was a 13-month year, and that corresponds to this particular spot in the spiral. So we can still use it. The 19-year cycle is so good that if we start it off again and have a look at how it goes, we can handle it. There's an 18-year eclipse cycle that shows when you can have eclipses. And I'll just show you 2 samples from 2 eclipses just to convince you that the 18-year eclipse cycle is, oh, here go the lights again. I don't know, man. Something's clicking. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Basically, this is a lunar eclipse. You can barely make it out, but there's the moon eclipsed. Down here is a picture from NASA of how the moon moved as it went into the shadow of the Earth, where it was at full totality. You can see it's north of the center of the shadow of the Earth, and how it moved out again. And then 18 years later, we actually have to go to Japan because it's daytime in Kingston. But if we go to Japan, there's the lunar eclipse again. You can see it's a very similar eclipse, right? And that's the way the 18-year eclipse is like. It falls out after 10 or 12 repetitions of 18 years. You have to rejig it again. But it's a really lovely little cycle. It's actually 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. But it's a good cycle. All right. So there are eclipse cycles. I'm just going to whiz through here. And then I'm going to come to the front face to show you what we have left of the actual front face. So I said most of the front face was reconstructed. I'll stick by that. This is what we have left. So there's our little lunar silvered ball in its plate. We have that bit. And then we have bits of the front, bits of the display from above and below this piece of calendrical and zodiacal information. And so there are 2 circles here. The pointers for the planets that we saw in that initial animation all come out and point to these 2 circles. And the inner circle is the signs of the zodiac. I wanted to make sure I got that right. The 12 signs of the zodiac, you can't read it here. But if a pointer is coming out and pointing to something here, you can read off how many degrees of Aries or Taurus or Gemini the planet is in. And so as it moves through the zodiac, it stops, it goes backwards and goes forward again. And then one of these pointers, the pointer for the sun, went out to the outside dial, which had the days of the year in the Egyptian calendar. And so you could read off what day of the year it was in the 365-day Egyptian calendar. That's also got a pin in it that you can remove and click it forward by a day and put the pin back in every time you have a leap year. It's absolutely amazing. And so our pointers go around. We have the Egyptian calendar around the outside. There's our half-silvered ball put in. And then the zodiacal signs. These include a parapegma. Nobody will care much about that except me. But basically along this zodiacal sign, every now and then there's a letter like an alpha, a beta, a gamma, or a delta. And that's keyed out to an inscription out here that tells you what the fixed stars are doing, which is the original way of trying to regulate the solar year for the Greeks and Romans. And so there are devices called parapegmata that involve holes for pegs with exactly this information written beside them. And on those devices, you would move the peg every day in order to figure out where you were. On this device, you just pick out the letters and you can read off what's there. And it goes on the bottom and the top. There's parapegmatic information up here as well. And then we're not exactly sure how the planetary the lunar phases are being shown. We're not exactly sure how the planetary phenomena were being displayed, but I'm fairly confident in Michael Wright's reconstruction. I think that's basically in the ballpark. We know that because we can read the instruction manual on the back to some extent, and it talks about how the different pointers are arranged. And then finally, just to close off, I want to give you a sense of just how out of out of the world this thing is, just how much it's doing that we had no idea could be done. The next, even passably complex geared device from antiquity is from the 5th century CE, and it's this thing. And it's just got a handful of gears for showing the days of the week. It does, for those of you who are interested in engineering, have the world's earliest ratchet. You can see here, that thing. That clicks so you can't turn the days of the week backwards. Very smart. Lovely little thing. It also has in here, showing through these holes, the phases of the moon. There would have been a case over this, so you only saw one of these two things at a time. But as this thing turns, the moon would come in and come out, so you would see some kind of semblance of its phases. And that's it. Those are our 2 geared devices from antiquity. And until we get the first mechanical clock that we know of, Alessandro de Dondi in 1344, we see nothing else as complex. And this is one of the puzzles in the history of technology. We finally get a mechanical clock. You want a mechanical clock, partly because you want to make sure that your prayers are being given at the right times of day, right? Monks have a tendency to sleep through Vespers. It's true, right? You've all heard the song Frère Jacques, right? That's about waking up for Vespers, right? Dormez-vous? Sonnez les matines, right? Ring in the Vespers. That's what it's about. And so there's some drive in the Middle Ages to try and improve water clocks to wake these guys up. But, you know, if that's all I was trying to do, this device with an alarm is all I need. De Dondi doesn't do that. De Dondi builds this thing. It's the first mechanical clock we have. It just comes out of the blue, and there it is, right? And it's got faces for each of the planets, including their forwards and backwards retrograde motions, right? He does that. It's got a dial for the sun. That shows us the hour, right? If it's directly overhead, it's noon. If it's on the horizon, it's 6. If it's directly pointing down, it's midnight. If it's on the other horizon, it's 6 in the morning. You can actually see here the drive mechanism for one of these pointers. That's a planetary pointer. I think that's Venus from the size of the epicycle there. So 7 different faces, 7 different things. I'm not sure on this particular clock whether he has that silvered lunar ball. But the fact that, just that puzzle, why if you were just trying to wake up monks, why would you build something this complex? The fact that it comes out of nowhere. 1344, we have no clock. 1343, we have no mechanical clocks. 1344, there's this. Michael Wright, again, to go back to him, swears up and down that he's absolutely convinced that there was a continuous tradition of building these things from the Antikythera mechanism forward that we've just lost because it was mechanical rather than written, and because bronze gets melted down and reproduced. I don't know if he's right, but it's a really charming, charming idea. Yeah. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.